live episode of Surviving the Survivor. We bring you the best guests in all of true crime. Don't forget to subscribe and smash that like button. Here's your host, Emmy Award-winning broadcaster, Joel Waldman.
What's up, STS Nation, and welcome to an afternoon episode of Surviving the Survivor, the podcast that promises to bring you the very best guests in all of true crime. And today, as every other day, but especially today, that is no tagline. That is our reality, and you're about to find out why. This is one of the better panels that we have assembled. And today, talking about another serious crime, but as you know, we always try to infuse a little humor into the macabre nature of the subject matter. But the search for two Oklahoma, or actually Kansas moms who were murdered in Oklahoma came to a sad and tragic ending. The arrest of four people in the remote part of the panhandle of Oklahoma led to the discovery of two bodies confirmed to be those of Veronica Butler and Jilian Kelley. Those are the two Hugoton, Kansas mothers who were discovered. Grandma Tifany Adams, Tad Cullum, and Cole and Cora Twombley were arraigned in court, criminal court last week. And guess what? Now there is a fifth suspect in custody. There was some talk about a guy named Paul Grice. We will get to him in a moment. But pleased to introduce some new best guests today, and they are superb ones. Dave Walker, top right, the man who has a shirt that says retired, and he earned it. 36 years as a patrol officer, narcotic investigation supervisor, burglary detective, robbery detective, and a homicide detective, and Tulsa, Oklahoma Man of the Year back in 2018. You know him from the show First 48. We've got Detective Sergeant Chris Anderson from that show on as well, but I'm sure you recognize the face from First 48. Bottom left, you've got Jim Fuda, who is now a public safety advisor. He has a proven track record in the areas of law enforcement training and security. We just did a Surviving My Biggest Case episode with Jim, and it was fascinating. Please check it out. It's under the video tab on the YouTube page. He is an expert on hostage negotiations, responding to more than 300 hostage and barricade situations during his 33-year tenure with the King County Sheriff's Office in Seattle. And now he is doing all sorts of good work with Crime Stoppers. The guy has done it all and has a really interesting take when it comes to cracking open investigations. Jim Van Allen is no small potato either, coming to us from the Pacific Northwest. He's a certified profiler and experienced threat and risk assessment specialist, 31 years of experience in law enforcement and investigations with the Ontario Provincial Police, 15 of which were spent as the manager of the OPP Criminal Profiling Unit. So he is here, and he can give us some insight, I think, into the psychology of five people coming together to commit such a heinous crime. Dave Walker, just obviously your first time on the show, very from a very macro perspective. You're out there in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Where does this rank on the hideousness scale of crimes here?
I really believe that these five, now there's five, really thought that they had this planned and thought out and what issues and things like that, but quickly realized that it fell apart, and they're going to learn all the mistakes they made. Man, it's just it is what it is. I mean, right where you assume the killers are going to be, that's where they were, and there wasn't anything really strange about it from what I've learned and read about. So it is the suspect, them, and that's who did it.
I've got Jim Fuda covered up for a moment. It should fix itself in a second, but I love my shepherd says, come back to the department, Dave. Tulsa misses you. Any plans to unretire, Dave Walker?
Not in law enforcement, no. There's a lot going on, but no, I will never go back into that. It's just a lot of work. It's physically and mentally draining, as your guest and everybody else that works these things know.
Yeah, 100%. Just some quick background, and then again, we'll dig back into this. Veronica, Butler, and Jilian Kelley, they disappeared back on March 30th. Today is April 25th, and this investigation moved very quickly. They disappeared while they were driving to pick up Veronica's two children to have a birthday party for them. Tifany Adams, I call her Granny Adams, who is the children's grandmother, was in a bitter custody dispute with Veronica Butler, who was only allowed supervised visits with the children on Saturdays. Jilian Kelley was authorized to supervise the visits, according to the affidavits, and that is when things went sideways. Jim Fuda, you bring 30-plus years of experience with some bad guys who would barricade themselves in. How desperate do people become when it revolves? And I just reached out to you guys. There was just a story out of Oregon, a former police officer who unalived his ex-wife and the mother of his child and then took the kid. But how heated do things get when it comes to custody battles and people fighting over children, Jim?
Well, it's what's really sad is when it gets to that point, it isn't about the kids anymore. It's about getting even with each other. And when you've got to go to an abandoned gas station to exchange kids in the presence of other people, it gets pretty sad. So, and you see that this is a rural area, not a lot of policing. Actually, our chairman of Crime Stoppers Global Solution, John Lamb, lives in Bartlesville. This is the opposite ends of the state. And he says this group that these people were affiliated with, the God's Misfits, is a known group, a religious anti-government group. So they were tied in under one common belief. And I like Dave says, I think they thought they were going to get away with it.
Jim Van Allen, I'll put up, we've got the 4 here, and the COE is about to put up the mug of the 5th person here. But these are the 4 who were initially arrested. That's the grandma on the top left and her 43-year-old boyfriend that looks like he could be 119. That's Tad Cullum on the right. And then the Twombleys, who are a couple on the bottom here. They're alleged to be part of a group called God's Misfits, which we can get into. It's part of an anti-government group that had a religious affiliation. This is all 5 now. Grice is on the far right. He's the newest one, Paul Grice, to be arrested. But Jim Van Allen, what about this group? I know you didn't have a ton of time to prepare it all, but just generally speaking, when people are part, I don't know if you call this a cult or what you would call it. They're also, most of these, I believe, are sovereign citizens, so they don't respond to American law. They think that it doesn't pertain to them. What happens to these people that they end up in this sort of state of mind in these types of groups?
Well, it's overall, as simply as you can put it, it's water seeking its own level. There's a lot of moving parts here, in my opinion. There's the right-wing extremism of anti-government, antitrust. It's got religious affiliations. If I had to label this with one label, I would introduce the phenomena of tribalism. And this is a bunch of years ago, about 5 years ago, I just saw a movement of these like-minded people gravitating towards each other in small cells, supporting each other, feeling very justified in what they're doing. And I thought, this is going to be one of the biggest challenges to law enforcement. And tribalism is just a human nature thing of seeking similar people with similar values, whether it's from genetics, culture, political, their sports tribes, everything. But these are anti-government. These are religious affiliated. The name they chose speaks a lot about themselves, God's Misfits. I'm sure he's very pleased with them too. And tribalism can have a lot of benefits for people in terms of helping you survive, giving you social and cultural benefits. And the dark side of tribalism is distorted thinking, supporting each other, undervaluing people that are not within the group, and they have an appeal towards violence as well. And their thinking is consequential in that the end justifies the means. So they're supporting Ms. Adams with her conflict based with Veronica, Butler, and the child custody dispute. And they also killed Jilian Kelley, apparently, because she was supporting Ms. Butler. And you've got the in-group versus the out-group. Your values are not my values, and we're protecting our member as much as we have to.
Dave Walker, when hopefully you'll come back on the show. Maybe you won't. I don't know after this experience, but I like to digress. So let me ask you a question. Look at this. If memory serves me correctly, Dave Walker and I retired on the exact same day, August 31st, 2018. My favorite first 48 team is Tulsa. There you go, Jimmy McNulty. Same day. Jimmy, Dave, I was going to, and Jimmy, I could ask you too, but Dave, I was going to ask you, now that you're retired, it's such a high adrenaline, high stress job. What are you doing now that you've been out?
Well, I'm trying to save the world, but it's in a little bit of a more focused area. I've got a little program called Save the 6-Year-Olds, and it's through baseball. It says retired, and there's some baseball spikes on here. So I'm really trying to prevent the next murder, the next foursome, or whatever you got, the next tribalism, as Jim says, from the 6-year-old angle. Raise them up right, play catch with them. That's what I know. I know baseball, so that's what I do. So that's what I'm trying to do at the moment. And I'm interviewing people in recovery and convicts and that sort of thing to get a book going. So that's what I do to as research.
And are these kids that are in, coming from backgrounds that are troubled, these 6-year-olds that you're working with?
Well, not necessarily troubled kids. I think they're all public school children. And I think we can't forget the good ones, because they're going to be the leaders of the next generation. So I do interview them, as long as, the parents, and they've got every opportunity to go wrong too. So we got to keep the good ones along with the bad ones. And, through this program, it teaches them to learn a skill and then move on. Whether it's baseball or piano or dance or psychology, wherever they got to go, it gives them some support and a good feeling about themselves psychologically.
Excellent. And the fact that you're doing it with baseball is amazing. What's your favorite team, by the way? Because
so it's the St. Louis Cardinals, even though
there you go, St. Louis. So Dave, from Annie K, who always has good questions, why wasn't this 5th person arrested with the others? Did he get involved after the offings? That is the question. This is the 5th person. What's your hunch as to why the delay in his arrest? Same charges here: 2 counts of first-degree murder, 2 counts of kidnapping, 1 count of conspiracy to commit murder in the first degree.
Yeah, this is, again, my opinion. I think one of these folks, the 4, are talking. So somewhere along the line, the investigation with the cell phone records, the movement of the people, maybe where the bodies are found, this guy has come on board as being a suspect, and maybe not known right away. But as you investigate, you're going to find more people. And I absolutely agree. Everybody that's involved in a murder should be arrested and held accountable. So good for them.
Dave Walker, what makes a great homicide detective? We've got Phil Waters on the show every week. I don't know if you know him. Houston homicide, worked over 400 homicide cases with a 93% clearance rate. Very thorough, meticulous person. But what makes a good homicide detective?
My opinion, in the group I always try to assemble, is you got to have a caring attitude. If you don't have that caring attitude, you're not going to work 4 murders a night, help a teammate, so to speak. I like to put my team like in the baseball. We don't need all pitchers. You need somebody to catch it and chase it down. But teamwork is a big part. But the caring attitude that, man, we just can't have killers out there.
Jim Fuda, got two Jims on the bottom. It's challenging for me, but Jim Fuda, Bayou Babe says, I know I have to recharge from these cases. I can't imagine what law enforcement goes through. I was mentioning them before. We've got Detective Sergeant Chris Anderson from the First 48 in Birmingham. He actually just wrote a book called Man, You're Crazy about mental health for law enforcement. How tough is it on you guys to be day in, day out? You're dealing with barricade situations, people who are at the worst moments of their life, literally. That's who you're dealing with personally. But how tough is it for you mentally to be constantly, I mean, now you're retired as well, but to have been entwined in this day in, day out?
Yeah, it gets, when I was in it all the time, I was in special operations my last 16 years. You know, I always joke that was the big boys with toys, you know, attached with the SWAT team and air support and Marine unit, all that stuff, search and rescue. And I had 4 call out units, and it's a young man's profession. I tell you, when I got into my mid 50s, it got difficult to be out all night and then do your normal daily job. But a lot of it, my part of it was the detective stuff would have been really hard for me. I was more of a first responder type, make sense of the cluster, and then move on to the next one and let the detectives do their follow up and clean it up. I think there wasn't a word for it when we were growing up, but it's called ADHD now, and it was the thing that I was always good at the first part, but the follow up, dotting the I and crossing the T was just not my forte. My sheriff called me the Band-Aid. If you wanted something done yesterday, to have Fuda do it. But if you want to do a detailed report, give it to somebody else.
That would be me. Look at this from Canine Catherine in Maui. Loved your surviving my biggest case, Jim Fuda. P.S. You do not look a day older than 50. How about that? There you go.
Thank you. And I'm big 71.
Yeah, it's amazing. You look phenomenal. So policing helped you there. I'll attribute it all to the police work. From I Love My Shepherd here to Jim Van Allen. I just want to know, were they ambushed to where Jilian couldn't pull her weapon? So Jim Van Allen, we've got a little news on this. Jilian Kelley they found, according to the affidavit, a purse with her purse with a magazine pistol in it. News Nation, and I always take this stuff with a grain of salt, they are reporting that the two mothers, Jilian Kelley and Veronica Butler, did not, and I repeat, did not die of gunshot wounds. That is according to News Nation, which leads one to believe that this was a brutal killing because they found a hammer there. Jim, just your thoughts on this from your kind of profiler perspective, because I think everyone assumed that they were shot. Hearing that they weren't shot doesn't sound like it was a very pleasant ending. Not that anyone would be, but especially not in this case.
No, it's not. A broken hammer found at the scene, like it was described as an extremely brutal and bloody scene. I've never broken a hammer swinging it on a construction job. You really have to be hitting hard to break a hammer handle, unless it's some old piece of garbage that somebody picked up. But that's bludgeoning, multiple blunt force strikes. I've walked into a couple hammer murders, and your first impression is you think it's a shotgun that was used. The bloodiness of the scene and everything else, and then as you put it together, you find that it was repeated strikes with a hammer. Not a nice way to do it. Entirely brutal, and that goes with the psychology of this tribal group too. Anger focused towards an outmember, lack of compassion, things like that. We're protecting our people. You can speculate a lot of different ways why Miss Kelley didn't draw her pistol. We don't know if the pistol was even there. There was no indication of fired casings at the scene. A lot of people have firearms with them. And, there's gunslingers and then there's people with guns. And maybe she wasn't particularly competent, able. She's a pastor's wife. As a police officer, I gave myself permission to use my gun if I had to. Thankfully, I never did against a human being. But I was fully prepared to each and every time I went out. Maybe she reluctantly didn't draw the gun. Maybe she was incapacitated quickly and they took the gun away. We don't know yet. That's one of the unanswered questions. And there's always unanswered questions in homicide investigations. We may never know where the gun got to, if there was a gun, and it may be recovered down the road and be another piece of the puzzle against this group.
Jim, this is actually in your wheelhouse too. I was going to just flip back to Dave, but since we have you here from Bayou Babe, why so much hatred towards Jilian? I mean, it looks like she suffered basically the same fate at the hands of these people, and she was just there to supervise. And I hate using this expression, but I will here. Was she just collateral damage in all this, in your opinion?
No, I've seen a lot of murders where you could say a secondary victim died just to eliminate the person's value as a witness. Sorry you were here and saw all this happen, but now you have to die too, so you don't testify against me. This one's a little different, in my opinion, because there's some real hatred between Adams and Butler because of this child custody dispute conflict. And I think Miss Kelley was put in the same unempathetic, lack of compassion category as Butler because of her support of Butler. And they put the two in the same category. You're with us or you're against us, and we're going to treat you the same way. I think psychologically they were up to commit a murder of this type. And of course, the same level of violence is directed towards both victims.
Absolutely horrific. Dave Walker, back to you. By the way, Dave, did you play college baseball?
No, I watched a lot of baseball.
You watched?
I was on. That's where I learned it.
There you go. Just the brutality. If these reports are true that they were not shot, which is what everyone assumed, how does that change your perspective on what happened to these two women?
Well, I've been investigating hammer murders, hammer robberies. They're very violent. And I think tribalism, and Jim, you really hit it on the head. One starts in on one, beating them up really bad. And it blossoms into just a mental state of we're going to do as much damage as we can. Miss Kelley is probably a witness. I would think that calls for the death penalty here in Oklahoma, because you can't kill a witness just because they witnessed a crime. So even though, you have thoughts on the death penalty, this is brutal. I mean, and absolutely right. When you see somebody bludgeoned, no matter if it's a couple, 3 days old, it's not good. And man, it goes to the mindset of the suspects. They're not going to fix themselves through a group therapy anytime soon. So they have to be warehoused.
Yeah. Plus, I think they're trying to deny the police ballistic evidence. Like, these guys, guaranteed they've watched true crime shows, and they picked the hammer because it wouldn't leave ballistic evidence, wouldn't be able to be traced. They're very ineffective criminals, but they tried to cover their tracks. They buried the victims' bodies, got burner phones, used the hammer. I think they were just trying to commit their idea of a perfect crime, and it didn't. Because, I mean, firearms are very prolific in Oklahoma. but they chose not to do it. So you have to look at what choice they made. Why did they make it? And I believe it was to deny evidence to the police.
Lest you think we are not a global show, Cynthia coming to us from Spain, thanking the mods, best mods in the business. Jim Fuda, back to you. You've got experience with tempers flaring. Cooler by the Lake says the court must have been aware of the element of danger if they required a supervisor to be present. Why would they authorize a meeting at this abandoned location to begin with? Is there going to be, in your opinion, an investigation into this family court and why it was set up like this to begin with? This woman, Granny Adams, also had some previous issues, threatening people, death threats, things of this nature. Why did this happen to begin with, Jim, in your opinion? Just dropping of the ball?
Oh, yeah. What I've heard about this is that the mother actually, the grandmother had accused them of some kind of sexual assault going on against the kids. So she was only allowed supervised visits. So that's why I agree with Jim here about is the other lady that was killed along with the mother is that she was the supervisor. And I do agree that the posse that went after him looked at her poorly as well. So, but you got to hand it to the cops here. Is that you're in a small town, which would be very tough to police. Your kids go to the same school. You shop at the same grocery store. You eat at the same small restaurants. So I got to admit, I think they did a phenomenal job in bringing these people to justice in only 2 weeks. So let's shout out. In fact, I even heard on News Nation, I looked at myself, is that one of the suspects' brother is running for sheriff, and they used his vehicle when they went out to commit the murders. How tight the community is.
That's Cole Twombley. Yeah, very, very small community. Dave Walker, I mean, you're in Tulsa, big city, but how does that complicate it, being from the panhandle of Oklahoma, where everyone seems to know everybody? There was a judge that spoke out who was friends with one of the suspects. He was summarily forced to resign. How does it complicate it when everybody knows everybody?
Well, it does complicate it just because they all meet together, they all talk together. They don't look at it from another perspective. When you try to solve these crimes, that's why the OSBI came in, because they are outside. These tribalisms, these cult type groups really only recognize the sheriff. So I find it interesting that the brother of somebody is running for sheriff. They're trying to maybe even start their own little nation here in Oklahoma. But man, it gets tough. But when you look at it, if they have more than one person involved in this murder, it's going to get solved. It's just
and Dave, we're looking at the timeline here. March 30th, Veronica and Jilian disappear on their way to this birthday party for Veronica's daughter. April 14th, the remains are found. April 14th, same day, 4 suspects. I think it was a day before, and then the 4 suspects were arrested for murder. April 24th, 5th suspect arrested for murder. This is a very quick timeline. There were some fears, small Texas County, Oklahoma, small police department, small sheriff's office. Are you impressed from an investigative standpoint how quickly they were able to put all of this together? Obviously, They had the help of the OSBI.
Absolutely impressed with all this. I mean, the scientific nature, the Oklahoma medical examiner is going to be involved in this. I know we work with Angelou, and she's the anthropologist for them. So I can sense that this was done right. Even though they didn't let the media in on it, the media doesn't have to be in. The department, anybody involved in this did good. And I agree with Jim. A shout out to any time a murder gets solved, but this was horrific and well done, and it'll show up in court.
Dave, is there a murder that's still on your mind that's unsolved that you go to sleep thinking about sometimes?
Well, there's several. I mean, there's the Crystal Welch murder in 2014 that's unsolved. She was doper, but still alive, and they burned her. So a lot of forensic evidence went awry. But, there's a list of suspects from juveniles to ex-cons that were in the drug trade. So, yeah, that one still sticks with me. We haven't solved that one.
And that's just some insight into how much this job becomes a part of these guys' lives. So they deserve our respect here. From Super Planner Girl, who helps us behind the scenes. She says, thoughts on this? I think they knew, Jim Van Allen, that they wouldn't get away with it, but thought that they would have enough time to run and hide. What are your thoughts, Jim Van Allen? Dave Walker says, people commit crimes thinking they're going to get away with it. Do you think they thought this or no?
Oh, sure. I mean, very few people commit crimes that they know they're going to get caught for. There's always the hope that they're going to evade capture or identification. And these people covered their tracks. They got burner phones. They made previous attempts. They were communicating with each other. They bought weapons other than firearms to cover their tracks. They did a bunch of that. It was pretty organized compared to some murders you see, but still very ineffective. And where you're going to run and hide in rural Oklahoma, these people are so anchored there. They're very doubtful going to run more than the next state just to get away. I think they tried to get away with it, and they're just so ineffective. Talk about the police taking 2 weeks to solve the crime. That's because you're dealing with multiple accused, multiple victims, multiple defendants, and a mountain of evidence. They had the full of their duties just to process everything and figure it out and write it out and do a few warrants. I'll bet you this is still going, and I'll bet you they're not finished yet. I'll bet you there's going to be other people that have been brought into this conspiracy as well, that you're going to see the 5 suspects expand.
And there you go, right on cue from Kim DeLorme, Jim Fuda. How much worse is this going to get? So tragic. Jim Van Allen just said the conspiracy might grow. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. Let's face, these guys were not the Ocean 11 crew. They've got. There's going to be other people that know. And the first thing that the leader of the God's Misfits, Squirrel, who he goes by, said, we have no part in all this. But if they're mixed with a tight-in group, is that other people knew what was gonna go down.
Back to Jim Van Allen. This is his world here. From John Morgan, he's been saying this in the chat quite a bit. An attack by the sovereign citizens against the government. He keeps saying this is not a domestic crime in nature. It wasn't, obviously the custody issue, but it was bigger than that they were basically going up against the government, the state government, the federal government, saying, look, you can't control us. Do you think there's anything to that here? So, someone else here said,
they can, there can always be overlapping or multiple influences in people's decisions to commit crimes and their personalities. They bring all that into play. But I think, and the most obvious and probable explanation for this crime is a conflict stemming from the recent custody dispute involving Tifany Adams and Veronica Butler. When I was involved in a murder investigation, I always asked myself the question, why now? Why now did somebody resort to this extreme level of criminality and decide to kill this other human being? Why now? Because it's still a very unusual crime. It's a rare crime, far more rare in Canada than the States, but there always has to be a reason. Why did it happen now? And the custody battle seems to be the most obvious reason in my mind. Sure, they've got a lot of this other interference, nonsense, anti-government, religious, fundamental influences in their background. But I think it's the group supporting Tifany Adams in her effort to rid herself of Veronica Butler.
What I find interesting in this is that Jim's absolutely right, but the part about the group fundamental in this is that if my wife cheats on me, and I go to Dave and say, Dave, I want you to go kill my wife. He doesn't have any skin in the game just because he's my friend. So why would he get involved if my wife is cheating on me? So that becomes more the crime of passion kind of thing. But if I think that out and you bring other people together in my group to help me along with that, I find that more of the cult mentality.
From LC here to Dave Walker, do you think that some agreed to admit guilt to protect other gods' misfits in the area? Is that something that you'd be looking at as a lead investigator here because of the tight-knit nature and the fact that this is basically what it amounts to a cult in many ways?
Yeah, I think you have to look at the reason why somebody's going to confess. I think ultimately it's going to be self-preservation. Very rarely you're going to find, even in tribalism in Waco or those places, are you going to find somebody willing to take a hit on something this gruesome just to protect somebody else. So that's why I think when you talk about expanding suspects, you're going to see that. You're going to see the investigation flourish into the point where it doesn't really matter whether your main guy is lying. The investigation is going to tell you what you need to ask next and who's going to get caught up further down the road. The longer this goes, you could see more people. I would be a little bit more surprised in that, but man, nothing's off the table. But the fact that the main confessor is trying to hide somebody else.
And thank you to Phoebe for super sticker here. But back to Dave Walker on this from our friend Mish in Cape Town, South Africa. Lest you think we are not a global show. Is any one of our best guests, Dave Walker, surprised these five didn't turn on each other before they were arrested? Too many cooks kind of thing. If not before they're arrested, are these five going to start to point fingers at each other now, do you suspect?
Well, I don't think they're all five are going to go to trial together. So, yeah, you're going to have somebody starting to point fingers, and that's already happened. So, no, they're, the gods and misfits, once they get behind bars, are exactly that. Then you forget God, and they just become misfits, and they're going to kind of in a way that some of the psychologists will deem that as appropriate for their mentality. I just can't think that this is going to turn out well for any of them.
Jim Van Allen. So this is the fifth guy now. By the way, Remembering Crystal is an episode of First 48 from Jimmy McNutty. This is Paul Grice. This is the fifth suspect. Again, 2 counts of first-degree murder, 2 counts of kidnapping, 1 count of conspiracy to commit murder in the first degree. 31 years old. He was charged in Texas County, and the charges, as I just read, are the same as the others. Jim Van Allen, according to the OSBI and the affidavit, this guy, Paul Grice, told an OSBI agent that he, in fact, participated in the killing and burial of Veronica Butler and Jilian Kelley. Does this mean, does this tell us that this admission came from him freely, or is this something that came up in questioning, or do we just not know?
Oh, it likely came up in questioning as he was being interviewed. He's clearly been identified as part of this group, probably for good reason. They purchased 5 taser devices, and there's 5 suspects under arrest right now, which speaks to me that probably all of those 5 took an active role. But I wouldn't be surprised to see somebody else involved in a peripheral role in this that knew something, that said something, maybe an act of furtherance, which puts them in the conspiracy as well. Yeah, he's probably been interviewed. You confront them with what you know, what other people have told you, the evidence that you've gotten, and when a lot of bad guys realize that you know everything about the crime, at that point they're going to start talking to you about it. If they think they've got a chance to still pull the wool over your eyes and lie to you, they'll do that. But if you convince them, we know this, we know you did that, we know you're involved because of this, it's a done deal, and then they'll start talking to you, I find.
And then there's this, and I'll be honest, I wasn't aware of this. It was probably an affidavit, and I missed it. But from Phoebe, and we'll throw this back to Jim Fuda, it looks like Cook family here may be arrested since they were babysitting for the children. Did they know the reason they were babysitting? I assume whoever was babysitting for these kids at the time that this murder was carried out, they've got to be questioning them, pretty intently, right, Jim Fuda?
I would think so. I mean, that's all part of the investigation. I'm sure that's what the OSBI is doing right now is putting all those extra pieces together. So absolutely.
And here it's saying we're getting conflicting reports that Cora's 16-year-old daughter was babysitting the children. When Cora returned home, she indicated what they did, and they told her to clean out the bloody truck. So this 16-year-old, by the way, is very key to this investigation. Dave Walker, speak to that. So this comes up in the affidavit that the Twombley, it's Cora Twombley's daughter, not Cole, even though they're married, that she apparently gave the investigators a lot of information. Will you typically, in a domestic situation, do you go to the children? Are they the ones that typically will speak to you?
You go to wherever you have to go. 16-year-olds will talk. We do go to them. Family members will talk. Kids, if haven't been too much immersed in this cult atmosphere, will probably think they're smarter than you. And if they're trying to get away with it or lead you astray, that will come out. And as Jim says, once you convince them that it's not going to work, they will talk. I also arrested 14, 15-year-olds for attempted murder. And that almost sounds like what you just said. If you're going to clean out the truck and there's blood in there and all this comes down and you don't go to the cops and we have to come to you, boy, that's a real possibility that there'll be charges filed on an accessory charge.
Jennifer Cornman, that's a good question. Dave, back to you. Does this teen, because of the nature of this community being so tight-knit and these misfits seemingly knowing everybody, does she need to be put in some sort of protective custody?
It's really protective custody is kind of a hard thing to get done, especially on a state charge. Protective custody legally means you're sent out of state and you change your name and you do all those kind of things. No, I would say she's very out front in the investigation now. So I think being out there and doing what you got to do would be fine. Now, that doesn't mean that, somebody's going to sneak in and kill her, but man, this case is made. There is no benefit to killing a 16-year-old witness.
Yeah, that would be absolutely horrific. Jim Van Allen, a more macro picture from a guy with 30-something years of experience profiling a lot of horrific murderers. Does anything surprise you, Jim? That's question number one. And question number two, why do so many people commit so many hideous crimes? I mean, don't they know that they're going to get caught, Jim? Short answer.
Well, they should. They're watching crime TV shows and maybe reading books, trying to be educated to get ideas how we can cover it up and be one step ahead of the police. But these people are horribly, horribly ineffective. the mountain of evidence they have left behind for the police to recover and assemble and present to the court is staggering. There's a mountain of evidence they have to try and crawl out from underneath, but they're very, very ineffective. Like just the point you raised, asking a 16-year-old to clean out a bloody truck. Are you kidding me? If that was my truck and I got it bloody, I would clean it out myself. Only one person can keep a secret. And they're bringing in their 16-year-old daughter? Wow.
Yeah. Well, Jim, it turns out this guy...
Telegram, tell your 16-year-old daughter, and the police are going to know that one.
Yeah. Well, Jim, this guy, Paul Grice, who just got arrested the 5th, it turns out, according to Jessica Souza, he has 3 small children himself. Why the hell would he commit this crime for Granny Adams and go to prison the rest of his life and now leave another 3 kids behind? I mean, wouldn't he think of his children before he would think of Granny Adams?
Shared group, man. Shared group. Shared values, protect the group, focus animosity towards non-members of the group. Granny Adams was being sufficiently threatened by Veronica Butler's custody action. And our move is to protect her. And that's another thing. We thought we were going to get away with it. I will be okay with my family. We'll keep our mouths shut and we won't tell anybody. Well, that fell apart quick. And they had a plan, but a lot of criminal plans are not very extensive. We're going to kill the guy for whatever purpose we want, get the money, get the drugs, prevent her from being in the custody dispute. But this isn't a long-range deal. These people are not career criminals that Dave and Jim have chased all their careers that are really good at covering up their tracks and trying to avoid police apprehension. This is a clown show. This is really a clown show. And if I can add one other thing too, I have never really had any investigative interaction with the police in Oklahoma. But a few years ago, I went down and I did a 1-week course on risk assessment, threat assessment with the police in Tulsa. And these were some of the smartest, best educated officers I have ever worked with across North America. So, and it's like a dream team, you've got all these people supported by FBI and state agencies, coroners, pathologists, forensic labs. This is a very formidable army that's against these 5 suspects. And they're, like Dave said, this is a made case. It's made 10 times over. It's only going to get worse.
Wow. Cheryl Harvey here. Here's my theory as a true crime junkie. I'll go to Jim Fuda on this. The girls were surrounded, meaning Veronica and Jilian. The road was blocked, by the way, by the Twombleys, who pulled up and blocked the intersection of that rural road. Tasered. They were then tasered, brutalized, transported, and buried, partially alive, perhaps. I heard Jilian had a magazine clip, but no gun. Jim, again, I mean, if this is true that they were not shot, this had to be one of the most brutal types of murders that one could imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially what Jim mentioned about the hammers. How many times have you broken a hammer when you're working around your house? So it's obviously, I don't think they were partially alive. I think that they were obviously killed at the scene, blood on the street. So they were obviously drug out of the car and beaten. And then transported to where they were buried. So, like I said, I don't think that at that point there was even a need for a firearm the way that they were beaten and brutalized. So, yeah, it's a horrible situation. But beaten and killed in one spot and transported to another one's rented property and buried.
Look at Dwayne Harris. Hey, Joel, I can't stay, but wanted to give a few gift memberships. One of the most generous guys from Detroit, Dwayne Harris. And there it is, 5 Surviving the Survivor memberships he just gifted. So thank you to Dwayne Harris for that. Dave Walker, I always ask, I have a running joke, which isn't very funny, on Fridays with Phil, who is the homicide detective, and Scott. They do a regular show. If anything surprises them anymore after everything they've seen, I mean, are there crimes that still stun or shock you, or have you seen everything at this point?
No, I think there's plenty for me to see if I was still in it, and that's kind of why I got out of it. But I think it's the big question we ask is why. Why does something happen? If you can find the why, you'll get to the who. It's one of these things where you don't know what's gonna, what you got. But there's going to be things that are going to make me cry if I was to see it again. So, kids. Anytime you got kids involved, and the kids are involved here. We mentioned the kids are now parentless, and they're in the system somewhere. Oklahoma's not a good place to be if you're in the system. So, but brutality is brutality, and we look past that as investigators. You don't want to really stare at the crime scene. You just kind of get past it. Now you got to go to work. So a murder's a murder, but yet how it gets done is unusual. And yes, there's going to be some murders that are just worse than others.
And Dave, I'm a former broadcast news guy, the guys that used to hound you guys out in the field. How much of a pain in the ass are we for you when you're trying to do your job?
The media, I tell you, here locally, they were great. And no, you're not a pain in the butt, but you're after one thing. And I learned early on, if we give the news people their soundbite, they'll get out of the way. You tell them we don't have a comment, man, you guys are good investigators, and you'll be a pain in the butt. Give you something and get you out, get you back in the studio, and then you're out of my way.
And then, Dave, right back to you from Ned Smith, who is a character. Where does the kidnapping charge come into play if they were all found dead? Does this imply that they were taken from one location to another?
Well, it can imply that they were taken from one place to another. It can just be held there. They were held against their will in the car. It doesn't have to be like the typical hostage kidnapping, take them somewhere and demand a ransom. All they had to do is try to get out of the car, and then you're kidnapping them because you're holding them against their will to be killed. And so that's where the kidnapping charge comes in my opinion.
And Jim Fuda, I mean, there's always so many ripple effects from these crimes. I mean, Veronica and Jilian, 6 kids together, when you add them all up. Then you hear Grice, this 5th suspect, has 3 children. Twombley's at least 1. I think they have more. Again, no one's thinking about this except Amanda here. So many people affected by this evil. What about these ripple effects from these crimes? It just goes on, and people, the victims' families will never recover.
You just said it. Now, kids are without parents. Who's going to get farmed out where? Who ends up in an orphanage? What relatives are going to take the kid? How are these kids going to grow up? Who's going to feed him and care for him? It's and then the state of Oklahoma paying for life in prison for 5 or 6 people too. That comes even back to the taxpayer. So there's all kinds of things that go along when people commit crimes like this.
It's crazy. Jim, back to you. I'm just thinking here. I once heard a statistic. I have no idea if it's right, and you've dealt with these people who want to unalive themselves. If you talk to them 48 hours after they want to do that, they're like in a completely different mindset. That emotions can run over people very quickly. I mean, you were always dealing with people in their worst moments, either wanting to unalive themselves or unalive other people. Talk to us about kind of the emotional roller coaster that people go through in those very tense moments. Does it generally pass? I mean, in this case, I think there was so much animus, but I mean, if you could go back in time and speak to Tifany Adams before this crime was committed, would you have been able to talk her out of this, do you think?
No. I think that her mind in this was set up, and what I dealt with in the hostage negotiations world was people that were barricaded. Once you put them in that hot box, make their world small, manipulate their environment, and you're their lifeline out to the outside world. Over time, there's a better chance that you're going to get what you want out of it. But with the suicidal barricades, they've got that desire to die, but to actually put the gun to their head and pull that trigger is a very short period of time. That's what I call the trigger point. Why is hold on, the negotiator's coming. Okay, I guess I'll wait and talk to the negotiator. So once you pose options of what they could do, get them past that trigger point. For the most part, they will come out. So this is a whole different perspective of these weren't planning a suicide; they were planning to kill somebody else for another gain.
When you have someone that wants to unalive themselves, Jim Fuda, what do you say to them? What's the first thing that comes out of your mouth?
Well, it depends. Like I told you on the other episode that we did, is that if you can present yourself as a real, live, flesh and blood human being, someone who has wants and needs like everybody else, is that there's a greater likelihood you'll get what you want. So with that said, is that being able to talk to these people in crisis and put your own analogies to it. That's awful that your wife just died and that you've lost your job and, these precipitating events that happened in the past 24 hours, and then relate to yourself. Well, God, I've never been in this position you have, but I knew what it was like when, I lost a job years ago and how I felt about it. So you bring those analogies in to build that relationship bond and get someone to trust you, and then pose some options, and there's a likelihood that the person's going to come out.
From I'm the Mom, that's why it's a good name. I'm the Mom, that's why. Can someone answer this, please? Why leave Jim Van Allen, to you on this? Why leave evidence like the magazine and the purse, and then bury these women 10 feet deep? Is this just because they're not the smartest criminals in the world?
Yeah, well, actually, what I see is a poor effort to conceal evidence and deny that evidence to the police. We often see various amounts of effort being employed to dispose of a body. I mean, some bodies are left exactly where they drop. Some are dragged into the bush. Some are covered up with sticks, a very ineffective way to try and conceal it. They're just trying to buy time to get away. These folks buried them on leased property. That's the first time I've heard the depth of the hole 10 feet. That's pretty significant. That's not a shallow grave. And they're trying to conceal evidence, but they're doing it so poorly. The fact that their phones were pinged right to that area gave the cops an indication to go there. And then when you see this disturbed soil, I mean, that's a clue. So you're going to look in there. I understand there was some phones disposed of right at that location in a ditch or something. And again, like asking a teenage daughter to clean up one of the murder cars, that's ridiculous. So they're trying to do some of the right things, but they're doing it poorly, ineffectively, and it was easier for the police to capitalize on.
Shout out to Ida Shaw, who just gave a super sticker to Space Coast, who does all of our tech stuff on the West Coast. She didn't think I saw it, but I did see it. So shout out. There you go. Trust fund. Now you're a trust funded baby. Thanks to Ida Shaw. Thank you, dude, for your hard work. That is for Space Coast right there. Appreciate it. Dave Walker, to you, in the affidavit, a few more things to get through, and then we'll let these fine gentlemen go on this afternoon show. By the way, coming back at 5 p.m. today, there was another horrible murder that was not done with a gun, but blunt force trauma. This was back on August 5th of 2023. Rachel Morin was unalived on a hiking trail in Bel Air, Maryland, and they got a DNA hit on the suspect from a home invasion in Los Angeles, but the killer has never been actually identified. They just know it's the same suspect in LA as it was in Bel Air, Maryland. The family's not giving up, and two of our best guests are volunteering their own time. That would be Tim Papa, formerly of the FBI, and the geo profiler, another amazing Canadian like Jim Van Allen from Ottawa, who drove down to Maryland this past weekend. They've got video for us, and we're going to be doing a show on Rachel Morin at 5 o'clock. That story has really dropped out of the media spotlight. So please join us at 5 p.m. today. But Dave Walker, back to you. According to the affidavit, this Granny Adams person, quote unquote, provided a recorded statement to law enforcement indicating her responsibility for the death of the deceased here. That is a direct quote from the affidavit. It made it sound originally like she confessed, but now I'm reading reports that maybe this just came up in questioning. How do you read the tea leaves here? How do we know if she confessed or she was just giving up this information, I guess, maybe even by accident during, some line of questioning by people like you?
Well, I think she is probably the number one suspect from the get-go. So I think if you look at a defense standpoint on a confession, it's going to be the voluntariness and the willfulness and the knowledgeable giving up of her rights. So whether she was Mirandized or not, everything is going to have to be on video or at least on so you can hear or see wasn't under duress when she gave that statement. What you say there may be a lot of questioning, not Mirandized. She wasn't arrested, then there's really, no need to murder them. But that's what's going to get attacked in court is, the unmirandized statements that people make. And why did they make them? What did you suggest? Did you say we'd let you go free? Whatever you say will not be used against you. You try to trick them, but cops can't trick suspects.
They can in Canada.
Well, I mean, you can trick them, but to say you can say we'll let you go free if you just tell us what happened. That's not gonna fly in any court. So it leads me to believe that the confession will get attacked. Absolutely. But again, I've got all the faith in law enforcement that it was done correctly.
And Jim, what can you do in Canada that you can't do in the United States?
Just about anything you'd like to do to try and get the person to voluntarily discuss their involvement in a crime, but you cannot, as Dave suggests, promise freedom in exchange, like induce the confession with some type of benefit. You can't say anything like that, and you can't allude to the fact that there is evidence recovered that has not yet been recovered, or we have ballistic evidence from your gun proving your gun is the murder weapon. But it's quite free and open for you to say that the investigation is in its infancy, and what we intend to do is examine all this evidence, which might or is likely to produce determination of the involvement of your gun in this murder. So it's a fine line, but trickery is very open to us.
I like that.
And we like it. We like it a lot.
Yeah, I like that about Canada. So the Twombleys, according to affidavit 2, have a history of violent interactions, posing a grave danger to witnesses and community members. Jim Fuda, back to you on this. I mean, these sound like very bad people with bad intentions, and now they're sort of in, I guess, desperation mode. I mean, they're obviously behind bars, but I mean, do you think the community at large needs to be concerned that they're reachable on the outside if they speak, if they say anything? We talked about Twombley's brother running for sheriff. I'm curious to see if this guy wins now. But I mean, how unsafe is it, do you think, for anyone that might want to speak to law enforcement?
Well, what I would be concerned with now, they're in custody, and I don't think they're due to get out anytime soon. But I would worry about the cult aspect of it. The other ones that aren't, if there's more people involved, and like I said, that posse comitatus, so to speak, group that they're associated with. So that would be my concern for law enforcement.
And Jim Fuda, back to you on this. Emotions ran high during the arraignment last week. Basically, Veronica Butler's father wanted to tee off on these suspects in court. He used a phrase that rhymes with ducking witch and said, "You sorry pieces of S," and tried to almost make a move. The family had to restrain him. What I mean, on a serious note, what about the family right now? I mean, their emotions are running so high. And again, I don't want to stereotype small towns, but I mean, this guy could possibly try to exact revenge. I mean, they had snipers out there and the suspects weren't in vests, but you're part law enforcement, part psychologist. How would you, or what would you say to the family that's grieving right now that's probably never gonna, get over this?
Well, the first thing is let the process take its form, and that trust in that process, and that these people you're never going to have to deal with again, and pick up the pieces that you can, and we're here to support you, sort of thing. But the violence and outbursts in court is not an uncommon common thing. I told you that happened with me in the last episode we did of the guy talked out of the truck that had murdered his wife and her current boyfriend, and we started telling him about the tactics that we used, and he exploded in court, and I had to call recess for the rest of the afternoon. They wanted me in a suit that day, but I tell you, the next day I came back with my uniform and vested up, because I don't know if this guy was capable of taking one of the guards' guns and trying to use that against me at the courtroom. So I don't think that's uncommon.
By the way, what's interesting about this too is, people kind of refer to them as hillbillies. I got yelled at by someone who grew up in rural Oklahoma for saying that. But this woman, Tifany Adams, is reportedly has a net worth of like $9 million, maybe from land holdings. So, yeah, look at this. Ned Smith. This group is the Beverly Hillbillies of the Adelsons. The Adelsons, a story we've been doing here out of Florida. Another, they're a wealthy family, not wealthy anymore because they're spending all their money on their attorneys. She's about to go on trial, also related to a custody suit. Dave Walker, just to round this out, according to the affidavit, this kind of brings us full circle. Evidence suggested, quote unquote, severe injury. The affidavit points out that there was blood along the road where the car was abandoned. Veronica Butler's glasses on the ground. Again, this broken hammer. You've been in it long enough. Do you have a theory? I hate to put you on the spot here. I mean, do you think that they were basically just, I hate to say this, beaten to death at the sight of this car and then moved from there? What do you think happened?
I think by the location of the car, that was secondary to where this crime occurred. I think I don't know anything about the blood inside the car, but I think maybe the bodies were transported to that location and then offloaded into the truck. It sounds like, and then they were transported from there. I would say that, thinking about it, I wouldn't assume that the location of the car is where they were killed. They were killed and taken somewhere else. But again, that's just my opinion. The evidence will dictate where you go from that.
I'm curious. So why do you say that? I'm just curious. Why is that your theory?
Well, I just think that there wasn't much blood from what I understood around the car. So that leads you to think that they were just kind of offloaded into the pickup from there. So there's going to be a little bit of blood. But then again, I've been wrong before. But
Not often. Not often.
Forward.
Yeah. Stace on the case here says, I felt like Veronica expected something, but not to be murdered. Didn't Granny change the meetup place? So Granny told the paid supervisor that she had to pay to take some time off. I'm sure they're going to be looking at that. Coincidentally, to take a little vacation when all this happened. A person who never is on vacation, Jim Van Allen. He is a certified profiler and experienced threat and risk assessment specialist. He is always still in his retirement, looking at these cases, profiling them, and looking at them with a professional eye. He was with the Ontario Provincial Police, 15, which were spent as the manager of the OPP Criminal Profiling Unit. Jim Van Allen, your final thoughts on this particular story? I'm sure we'll come back to you on it. It appears like it was group think here gone bad.
Certainly does. And, I think the group mentality is going to be something we see more and more of in future years. This has been increasing, in my opinion, for at least the last 15 years. Examples go back even further, but it's increasing and it's concerning to me. And the level of violence, the level of lack of compassion for the victims is stunning in this case. The police are totally on it. And we're just going to have to wait till it works its way out and then works its way through the court. But I think this is a done deal.
A made case, as they've said. Jim Fuda, he has responded to more than 300 hostage and barricade situations. And by the way, we on Monday released an episode. If you go to the video tab, you can watch the one-on-one interview with Jim Fuda. It talks about a split-second decision he had to make during a hostage situation. Spent 33 years at the King County Sheriff's Office in Seattle. And he did all kinds of other things like security for dignitary visits, including for President George H.W. Bush, Bill Clinton, George W. Bush. The list goes on. And he is currently executive director of Crime Stoppers of Puget Sound. And the guy does not look a day over 50. I don't know what's in the water there, but I guess it's clean water up in Seattle.
Olive oil.
Olive oil. There you go. Jim, what's your, before we get to your final thoughts, I mean, what do you say to people who, let's say, are having a very, very bad day and think, all is lost in the world, they have no hope? You're a guy that was able to talk to these people. What would you say to someone who's going through a situation like that?
Well, that's the part about getting to know people and listen to what they have to say and point out the bright spots in their life, and that you'll get over whatever you're going through today. It's just that simple.
And words of wisdom. Always, my dad would always keep things simple. AA, they say, keep it simple, stupid. This is the link, by the way, right here, the COE about Jim Fuda. Doesn't have a lot of views, and it should have a lot because he gave a lot of his life to it. And we'll get it up there view-wise. People didn't know about it. We didn't properly promote it because we were dealing with the Jewish holiday and a bunch of other things. But Jim, is this a made case, this one that we're talking about today, as Jim and Dave have alluded to?
I totally think it is. And I think that it's going to, if it branches out, like we've talked about all hour here, is that there may be even more people being arrested here shortly. But I think it's a done deal too.
Kim Delorme, my son is a police officer in Ontario. He was with York Regional Police, Jim Van Allen. And Jim Van Allen, in my free time, I watch true crime. I just saw an episode, I want to say it was 48 Hours. They solved a cold case from Toronto from 1983. Horrific stabbing murder of two different women. Turned out the guy was living 8 hours north. Forget the names of the victims, but interesting case. They used investigative genetic genealogy all those years later. And look at this. Look at the Canadian pride here. Canada, love my country. Wish I could attend the book signing in Toronto. I'd love to meet Carm, I think she means, and Joel, but we will be at Queen's Bookstore on May 21st in Toronto. Last but not least, and he is Man of the Year in Tulsa for a reason. That's because he spent 36 years as a patrol officer, narcotics investigator, supervisor, burglary detective, robbery detective, and ultimately a homicide detective. And now he's doing the most important thing. He's teaching baseball to 6-year-olds to keep them out of trouble. My son, Dave, is about to turn 5. I brought him to baseball when he was 3, and he was drawing in the dirt on the first baseline. And I shouldn't say this to you, but I wanted to strangle him, but I guess he was a little young at that time. So I have to get him back to baseball. But I hope you'll come back on the show. Appreciate you being here. Your final thoughts, and one of the questions I have for you, you mentioned it briefly. Are these going to be separate trials, do you think, or will they all be tried together?
I can't imagine that all 5 are going to go together. I think they'll be separate because you're going to have people talking on each other. Maybe a couple will go together, but I think all 5 will probably be separate. And my other thought is, man, I really enjoy your guest. I'm not the psychologist. I was a guy on my team that could do all that in the negotiations. But I really enjoyed it, and I appreciate the invite.
Awesome. Does that mean you will come back, Dave Walker?
If I get all this figured out in a short time, yes, I'll be glad to come back.
Love it. Thank you to Dave Walker, Jim Van Allen, Jim Fuda. These are the best of the best guests. Appreciate you being here. Remember, 5 p.m. Eastern time, we are back on the Rachel Morin case. I didn't put this up here. The COE put this up here. This is the book tour starting May 6th in Miami Beach. I've got a book about my mom. She's a Holocaust survivor, a child Holocaust survivor saved by nuns. And it is a crazy world we're living in right now with anti-Semitism flaring all over this country. So she's a voice. She's a wild woman, outspoken. And if you get a chance to meet her, please come by. May 6th, Miami Beach. May 19th, New York City. May 23rd, Philadelphia. May 16th, Boston. May 21st, Toronto. June 6th, Tallahassee. June 23rd, Tampa. And we've got special best guests pretty much all along the way. The book is available right now on Amazon and will be available in bookstores on May 14th. And please, everyone, be nice to each other. This world's hard enough as it is. My mom says we're just trying to survive in a rough world. It looks like Jim Van Allen just bounced out. Guests, stick around for 1 second. Love you. Love you, Oklahoma. Love you, Seattle, Washington, and, of course, Oklahoma in general, where these crimes happened, and Canada, where Jim Van Allen is. Dave and Jim, stick around 1 sec.